My grade for the character design assignment I mentioned in the last video finally came through. I want to revisit the process while I clean up the files. How do I keep doing this to myself? The assignment description was to design an original character with a backstory and personality and everything, then model a 3D bust with a couple of facial expressions done with shape keys, and we had to hand it in as a game build to showcase the model and in slides explaining our design decisions and detailing the process a bit. I went about this slightly differently in the end, but I'll get to that in a bit. Because the video is about 3D modeling, I won't go into the concepting part too much. We've got this guy who got rejected from the PhD program for being a nut job, so he decided to go a more lucrative route by smuggling fairies, of course. And this here is his cousin, who he grew up with very close to until she ran off in her early teens. She now keeps the front of being an event manager, while actually being some sort of faithful consul politician person. Someone in class mentioned exactly what I'd hoped to convey, going, I love how she is gorgeous and he's just some guy. I tried to use shape language to complement their personalities and traits. As I also mentioned in my last video, I had wanted to stylize them much more, but all in all, I'm happy with how they turned out. I don't have any screen recordings for this part either, so enjoy more screenshot slideshows. Against the wishes of my lecturer, I actually started modeling before I've properly finalized my design because I didn't know how to design for 3D and I wanted to have some wiggle room in case something turned out to be impossible to achieve. I did do quite a lot of preparation just on paper before even opening Blender, just in terms of figuring out how shapes work, I suppose. I feel like it helped me conceptualize, especially in the early blocking out stages. The modeling of the face itself went very smoothly. I went straight into sculpting for the most part, which felt very intuitive, but I did end up regretting that a little bit later on because I'd over relied on it and now I didn't know how to actually model anything. Despite what people told me about retopology beforehand, this was actually my favorite part of the modeling process. I actually think it's weirdly beautiful. Even though the face went smoothly, everything else did not. I just didn't know how to go about hard surface modeling, especially as sculpting came so natural to me. It was kind of a letdown and it took so long. That's probably why I don't have many screenshots for this part, because I was busy struggling. It made me real grateful how I gave myself that wiggle room earlier, so I didn't have to painstakingly model all the intricate silverware I'd imagined. Anyway, now before I continue, I feel like I should mention I actually got a 3.6 out of 10 on this project for my first attempt. Mostly because my Unity build zip file was missing some items for whatever reason, so the teacher simply could not see my work. But I also needed the opportunity to do a lot more that I'd wanted to do anyway and that I had screwed up previously, and that turned out very well for me. Texturing, for example, was something I neglected on the first attempt. I made some dumb mistakes and many things went wrong. I don't want to talk about it. I did enjoy the little time I spent experimenting with Blender nodes, but it simply wasn't meant to be. I realized I was starting to run out of time and just tried to make her look cool in Grayscale, which worked in Blender but not in Unity, obviously. Texturing still wasn't my priority for the reset, but I had the time to take it a lot more seriously. Look how smooth she is. I found a solution for my gripes with my high poly model, so I baked the texture onto the low poly and found a very simple workflow of using a couple of nodes, then baking and importing into Clip Studio to draw only the necessary details. Last week I saw this video where the artist also used Blender and Clip Studio to do the materials. Since I plan to never touch Substance Painter unless I'm being paid, seeing that this type of workflow can produce results like this is very inspiring to me, and I definitely plan to get better at it in the future. Rigging was definitely my favorite part of the whole process. I used a mix of armature and shape keys, and I learned many different ways to go about things like expressions and eye movement. And I enjoyed this, making my character come to life more than anything else in the process. Read apology somehow a close second. However, I made some really dumb mistakes in the first go that I wouldn't have known about if I hadn't made them. The biggest one is I started rigging on the low poly model because I wasn't sure about the sculpt, especially as I didn't have time to sculpt the headdress and Shade Smooth looked stupid. I'll try it on this first, but obviously now I know you should only rig a finished character because you cannot apply shit to a mesh with shape keys. I also hadn't considered that we were supposed to use this pre-made Unity import thingy that school provided that did not recognize bones. Also, the code was illegible to me, as was the whole thing. It was only meant to simply take a key as input and output the shape key, which is boring, by the way. And since shape keys can only be applied to one object, I couldn't easily make a pose with the armature and save it as a shape key either. It was a mess. Even with the most complex expression, just dragging a shape key from 1 to 100 just didn't do it for me, but I tried to make it look as non-awful as possible with what I was given. So not only did I have a low poly, barely textured character that looked bad in Unity, she was also just standing there completely still with some awkward facial expressions when you hit F. This was the main reason I was very happy to redo this whole thing for a reset. I was very proud of my rig the first time around, and I wanted to have fully animated emotions, as well as a game scene that had some semblance of, you know, interactivity. I baked the high poly model to the low poly and found a simple solution for how the headdress was looking and did most of the rig from scratch. I'd already really wanted to have a quick peek at how animation works in Blender, so I created a couple simple animations and exported those into a beautiful, clean, unaffected Unity project and made a very simple multiple choice dialogue thingy. Do not look at the pros, I am not a narrative guy. It's simple, but it's so much better. I still neglected many things, like the veil and her tongue was licking her ribs, but we ignored that because she was only going to be visible from the front and you have to pick your battles or whatever. Because I still did not have the time for any of this, of course. And voila! Obviously, even in this final hand-in of this project, there's a lot of mistakes and it's overall beginner level. But considering that it was a totally new skill and I had limited time to refine anything, I'm really happy about the result. And evidently, so was my teacher. I've never seen grades like this in real life before. Now that I've got these files nicely cleaned out, I can lay her to rest. I will only be checking back once more soon to clean up some portfolio content. I want to make a splash illustration and or a reference sheet, a nicer version of the game build with sound effects, and one pretty render turnaround type thingy. And that's that. The second video on Ember's progress will be posted soon too. I've been keeping her files clean, and this time I will keep it that way. Unlike all of the other times I have said the same thing.